Three Chinese warships are leaving Sydney this morning after a few days docked at Garden Island. The visit took some by surprise, but Prime Minister Scott Morrison insists it was nothing more than a reciprocal visit. Professor John Blaxland of the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre at the Australian National University joins us now from Canberra. John Blaxland, welcome. So the Chinese ships are sailing out today. What did you make of the Australian decision to agree to this visit during the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Look, the timing was hardly ideal, but I think people probably weren't thinking about the date of arrival and the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen massacre when they were saying yes to the agreement. Of course, we understand that this actually was agreed to during the caretaker period of government when the Defence Minister, the outgoing Defence Minister, Christopher Pyne, was clearly distracted with other things, and when the department itself was not necessarily focused on this. In fact, it matches something that the Australian Navy and the Australian Defence Force has been doing in the region as well. That's the exercise or the activity called Indo-Pacific Endeavour, which I was very fortunate to be a part of a couple of weeks ago, which had a similar sized flotilla travelling to various ports around Southeast Asia and South Asia. Sri Lanka, India, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia. And that was about building relations. Now, for China, their counter-piracy operations in off the Horn of Africa near Djibouti in the Western Indian Ocean is actually something that's very important to China because China's trade routes traverse that part of the ocean, and it's very important for them to contribute to that. And this return voyage is, really flying the flag. It's a defence diplomacy activity, and it's something that Australia has gained benefit from through reciprocal access to Chinese ports, but has also provided an opportunity for some continuing to keep the door open, if you like, between China and Australia's navies, because after all, we're not at war with China. We've got some issues with them over a number of concerns, particularly the South China Sea and some of their actions in the Pacific. But by and large, Australia is seeking to build constructive relations with China. And of course, my own university, the ANU, has been subject to a hack, which a lot of people are saying is probably linked to China. So there's a degree of tension in the atmosphere at the moment, but that doesn't mean we can't get on with trying to make the relationship work as best as possible.
But what would have been the correct course of action by the Australian government and the Navy in relation to a decision around a visit which coincided with Tiananmen Square? This should really not have gone ahead?
Look, I don't know that there was much option because the voyage had certain dates that it was due to return back to China via Australia. To say no to that visit request would have, I think, raised the stakes perhaps unnecessarily, and I think by at least not touting the visit as some kind of triumphal entry was an attempt, on one level at least, to downplay the significance of the visit. But of course that raised a lot of heckles because the ships arrived, off Darling Point and other famous places in Sydney's harbour without people knowing in advance that it was going to happen, and with armed soldiers and sailors on the decks of the ships looking fairly aggressive. But I think people don't quite realise what things are like with Navy procedures nowadays. It's something Australian navies do too. We don't necessarily give advance notice of our visit to the public, and when we engage with the countries, we usually like to keep it a little bit circumspect because there are operational security concerns. That's not unreasonable.
In this case, do you think there should have been notification of the public?
I think it would have helped had there been a little bit of a notice. The night before would have been good. I mean, I think one of the things for the Chinese, and there are Chinese sensitivities here that need to be taken into consideration, they're looking to avoid massive protests on the wharf down at Woolloomooloo. You can understand that. Likewise, we wouldn't want that for our ships docking at Qingdao or somewhere like that in China. So it's a two-way street. It's easy for us to say, why didn't we do this? We should have done more. We should have poke them in the eye. Look, you know, that can really blow back in your face when you try and play that kind of game.
And so how important is it to maintain these bilateral military contacts, including port visits with countries that are potential adversaries?
Look, it's interesting. It's a very interesting question, Joe, because you think back, and I'm a historian by training, and I know that in the 1930s, the Imperial Japanese Navy made a number of port visits to Sydney, which were advantageous for the submarine raids that happened only a couple of years later in 1942. But I think realistically we have to recognise that we're not at war and we're looking to avoid war, and part of that means staying open and engaged, constructively engaged as much as possible, and looking for opportunities to cooperate. Now, here's another thought. There's been a number of instances when Australia has actually looked to China to collaborate with us on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief activities, one of which was, for instance, the search for the downed Malaysian Airlines aircraft in the Southern Ocean, where at short notice we found ourselves having to collaborate with the People's Liberation Army, Navy and Air Force over their search requirements and interests. So there are a whole host of reasons why you want the Australian Navy and the People's Liberation Navy of China to be able to cooperate and to have established points of communication and to have a working understanding and a respectful method for engaging constructively when the need arises, and in the hope that those opportunities will also generate some additional opportunities for constructive, peaceful engagement that's beneficial to both countries and to others in the neighbourhood.
Yep, okay. John Blaxland, thanks very much for talking to us this morning from Canberra.
My pleasure, Joe.